I arrived in Benchurch on a bitterly cold afternoon, the sort of cold that settles into your bones no matter how tightly you button your coat. The train station was barely more than a shed, and the town itself felt untouched by time. Quiet, hunched under gray skies, with rows of narrow brick houses and streets that seemed too empty for comfort. I came for silence, for focus. My final mathematics exams loomed large, and the clamor of city life had begun to gnaw at my concentration. Benchurch, with its cloistered charm and sleepy obscurity, seemed the perfect refuge. I asked a few locals where I might find a place to rent for a fortnight, something secluded, somewhere I wouldn't be disturbed. Their responses were cautious, curious. Some seemed reluctant to meet my eyes when I mentioned I was staying alone. And when I asked about the old mansion at the edge of town, set back behind a line of crooked oaks, its roof pitched like a sneer, their unease sharpened. Bad luck lingers in old walls, an old man mumbled as he weighed potatoes behind the grocer's counter. Another whispered, no one's lived there in years. And those who tried didn't stay long. But they offered no concrete reasons, only the kind of vague superstition that clings to small towns like moss on stone. I rented it anyway. The price was absurdly low, and the landlord, an elderly woman with paper-thin skin and darting eyes, seemed almost relieved when I agreed. She handed me a thick iron key and warned, "Don't pull the bell rope unless you need help. It's only for emergencies." I nodded, more amused than alarmed. I've never been one for ghost stories. The mansion was large, drafty, and dim, its interior coated in layers of dust that stirred in the beam of my lantern. The furniture was antique and heavy, all dark wood and frayed upholstery. Cobwebs sagged from the corners like ancient drapes, and the fireplace still held the ghost of its last flame, long since choked out by time. I chose the study for my base. It was the only room that felt remotely hospitable. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a massive desk sat near the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a faded oil painting of a man in judicial robes, stern-faced and sunken-eyed. There was something rigid and cruel about his expression, as if the artist had captured not a man, but a verdict. A thick, frayed rope dangled from the ceiling, attached, I presumed, to the old alarm bell in the tower above. It hung just behind my chair, swaying slightly when I passed. That first evening, I unpacked my books and notes, lit a few candles, and buried myself in equations. The silence was perfect, a kind of silence that felt sacred. But then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it persisted, soft scuffling along the baseboards, the occasional squeak, tiny claws against aged wood. Rats, I told myself. Old houses always have rats. Still, when I stood up and listened, the room went quiet, as if whatever stirred within the walls was waiting for me to sit back down. I returned to my work, trying to drown it out in numbers, but the unease had taken root. That night, before I went to bed, I paused by the fireplace. The portrait above it loomed larger in the dim glow. I couldn't shake the feeling that the judge's painted eyes were watching me, judging me. I shook it off. Ghosts weren't real. But still, I bolted my door that night. The scratching came again around midnight, a faint rustling beneath the floorboards. And then, silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. Waiting. I lay there for a long time staring at the ceiling, listening for a sound I couldn't name. I woke with a start. The sun had barely risen, and yet the judge's house already felt colder than the night before. I tried to dismiss the uneasy sleep I'd had, the strange dreams, the scratching in the walls, the sense that I was being watched, as nothing more than nerves. I reminded myself why I was here. Peace, isolation, focus. No distractions, no nonsense. After a quick breakfast of stale bread and weak tea, I explored the mansion in earnest. The place was a labyrinth of rooms, most filled with decaying furniture, peeling wallpaper, and thick blankets of dust. But it was the study that called me back, again and again. The high-backed chair by the fireplace, the massive desk with its worn leather blotter, the portrait that loomed over it all like a silent sentinel. And then, the bell rope. I hadn't noticed it in detail the night before. It hung from a small hole in the ceiling, frayed but sturdy, reaching nearly to the floor just behind my chair. It was unnervingly thick, almost like a noose, and when I gave it a gentle tug, I felt a resistance from far above. The old bell, no doubt, perched in the cupola, a relic of a time when such houses had servants or staff to summon. I told myself it was charming, quaint, but something about it unsettled me. I tried to ignore it. I lit the fire, set up my books, and buried myself in calculus. Hours passed in peaceful silence. The fire crackled softly, and for a while, I believed I had truly found the perfect place to study. Until I heard it again. The scratching. This time it was louder, more insistent. It came from the walls, from beneath the floorboards, even from the ceiling overhead. The scuttling of tiny feet, the occasional thump. Rats. Dozens of them, from the sound of it. I sighed, grabbed a candle and checked the kitchen and hallway, trying to trace the noise. But as soon as I moved, it stopped. The house would fall silent again, as if holding its breath. It was only when I returned to the study that I saw it. A rat, but not just any rat. It was enormous, far larger than any I had seen before. Its fur was matted and gray, and its eyes, God, its eyes, they were wrong, too focused, too aware, as if it were thinking. It sat on the high-backed chair across from mine, its body upright, paws resting almost casually on the armrests. It didn't flee when I stood. It didn't blink. It just stared. I grabbed a heavy book and hurled it at the beast, but with impossible speed, it darted toward the fireplace and, before I could react, scrambled up the bell rope and disappeared through the hole in the ceiling. My skin crawled. I stood frozen for a full minute, heart pounding, unsure of what I'd just seen. The rope still swayed slightly, the candlelight catching the dust it stirred. I forced myself to laugh, a nervous, hollow thing, and muttered something about country vermin. Then I did what any rational man would do. I pulled a chair over, climbed up, and tied the bell rope out of reach. I looped it around a nearby beam and secured it with a knot, telling myself it would stop the rat from using it as an escape path again. But even as I climbed down, I felt a strange sense of guilt, as if I had broken some unwritten rule. The rest of the evening passed in strained quiet. I studied, though my focus wavered. Every creak in the house made me flinch. Every time the wind moaned through the gaps in the windows, I looked over my shoulder. Just before midnight, I heard a soft thud behind me. I turned. The chair by the fireplace was rocking gently back and forth. I stood up slowly, scanning the room, but saw nothing else. No rat. No movement. I touched the bell rope. It was still tightly bound, unmoved. And yet, something had been there. I slept poorly again, plagued by the image of that rat. The way it stared. The way it disappeared. The way the rope had twitched after it climbed. I told myself it was just a creature of instinct, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had watched me, judged me. And in that silent, shadowy house, I began to wonder, was I truly alone? The next morning, I ventured into town. I needed ink, more candles, and, if I was honest with myself, a bit of human presence, even if only briefly. The silence of the house had begun to feel like a presence all its own, thick and watching. I told myself I was being dramatic. The grocer's shop was tucked between a shuttered tailor and a dusty bookseller, its windows fogged and its shelves crowded with everything from tinned soup to thick wool socks. As I picked up a jar of tea and some cheese, the grocer himself, a thin man with sunken eyes and fingers stained with tobacco, watched me a little too closely. "You're the one staying out at the judge's house, ain't you?" he asked suddenly, his voice hoarse. I nodded, expecting the usual small talk. Instead, he said, "Foolish place to be alone. That house, it's cursed. Always has been." I let out a short laugh, though it didn't reach my eyes. You mean the rats? Believe me, I've noticed. He didn't smile. It ain't just rats. That place belonged to Judge Hathorn. You know the name? I didn't. They called him the Hanging Judge. Real piece of work. Sent more men to the noose than anyone in this county's history. Took pride in it, too. Used to say the rope was God's arm, guided by his own hand. I set my items on the counter, pretending not to listen too closely. They say he died sitting in that house, still in his robes, still staring at the bell tower, waiting for it to ring one last time. Some think he made a bargain to never leave. That's a fine story, I muttered, trying to mask the chill creeping into my spine. He leaned forward. You tie up that bell rope yet? I looked at him, startled. How did you... I've heard things. Just mind what you pull on, son. And if you hear it ring at night, don't answer it. I left without another word. Back at the mansion, the sun was already dipping behind the trees, casting long, skeletal shadows through the dusty windows. I brewed a pot of tea, telling myself that the grocer's warning was nothing more than old folklore. Small towns survive on their stories. Every creak becomes a ghost. Every draft, a demon. Still, I checked the bell rope. It was still tied, tight, secure, unmoved. I settled at my desk, brushing aside old papers to make room for my work. The fire crackled, the light flickered, and for a brief while, I lost myself in the comfort of numbers. Mathematics was, after all, the one language that never lied. Then came the scratching again. Louder this time. It moved along the baseboards, then behind the fireplace. I stood, candle in hand, and there, just at the edge of the hearth, was the rat. The same one. Immense. Its coat dull and patchy, its tail dragging like a whip across the rug. It looked directly at me, its eyes impossibly dark and too intelligent. I lunged toward it. It didn't flinch. It waited until I was almost close enough to grab it. Then it darted upward, up the wall, up the bell rope, straight into the darkness above. I swore under my breath and pulled the chair over, rechecking the knot. The rope was exactly as I left it, still tied, still out of reach. And yet, it had used it again. That night I tried to sleep, but my dreams betrayed me. I was standing in the study, alone, in complete darkness. No candles, no fire. Only the cold, and the silence, and the heavy rope swaying gently beside me. I heard the bell ring. Once, twice, then a third time. Slower, deeper. The sound wasn't coming from the tower. It was coming from inside the walls. Then I saw him. Not the rat. The judge. A tall figure, robed and rigid, standing where the portrait should be. His face was hidden in shadows, but his hands were pale as wax and gripped the bell rope with impossible strength. He looked at me, or through me, and when he opened his mouth, I heard the tolling again. Coming not from his lips, but from somewhere deep inside my chest. I woke, gasping. The house was silent. The fire had died. But there, above me, the rope swayed. Just slightly. Enough to stir the dust beneath it. I didn't sleep after that. I told myself it was stress. A reaction to the eerie atmosphere. An overactive imagination fueled by too much tea and too many ghost stories from a jittery shopkeeper. But in the morning, I noticed something I hadn't before. The rat droppings. Not along the baseboards or the kitchen floor, but at the foot of the fireplace chair, as if it had been there, watching, waiting. And when I turned to leave the room, I thought, just for a second, I heard the faintest echo of a bell. I thought I was imagining things. By the fourth evening, my nerves were threadbare. The rats scurried more boldly now, brazenly scratching behind the walls, beneath the floorboards, sometimes even darting across the room in plain sight. I started keeping a broom close by, smacking it against the wooden panels whenever the noise became too persistent. It did nothing. They returned within minutes, relentless. The chair by the fireplace became their favorite haunt. At least, that's what I told myself. But one rat, the same enormous one, never scurried. It sat, always on that same chair, upright, watching. Its dark, gleaming eyes didn't flicker or flinch. It didn't run when I stood or when I threw something. It would remain until I moved too close, and then it would vanish. Always up the bell rope. I stopped trying to chase it, and instead, I began to dread its presence. That night, I was studying, trying to lose myself in a set of problems on infinite series, trying to think of anything but the heavy air, the shifting shadows, the rope that swayed ever so gently above me, when I happened to glance up at the fireplace. I froze. The portrait, the old, faded oil painting that had been hanging there since my first day, the judge in his crimson robes, his pale hands folded, his expression as lifeless as the canvas, was empty. I stood so quickly my chair scraped loudly across the floor. I walked to the fireplace and stood before the painting. It was not a trick of light. The frame was still there, still intact. The ornate brass plaque beneath still read, Hathorne, 1792 to 1851. But the canvas itself, once occupied by the grim likeness of the judge, was now void. The background, murky green curtains and a wooden chair, remained painted in fine detail, but the figure that once sat there was gone, erased. I touched the canvas. It was smooth, undamaged, not painted over, not torn, just gone. I stepped back, breathing hard. My mind scrambled for logic. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I had imagined the painting differently, misremembered. But I knew that face. I remembered the slant of the mouth, the severe eyes, the black cap resting in his lap. He had been there. I had seen him every night. Now he was not. As I stared, a sudden creak broke the silence. It came from behind me. The chair, the one by the fire. It rocked gently on its legs, just once. Just enough to let out a groan of protest from old wood. I turned slowly. No rat. No movement. But the chair was still swaying slightly. I moved toward it and placed a hand on the backrest, stilling it. I looked around. The house was silent. The bell rope above hung limp, but I had long since untied it from the beam. I had thought restricting its use would end the rat's strange behavior. I couldn't explain it. None of it. Not the rat, not the painting, not the phantom tolling of the bell I sometimes thought I heard deep in the night, muffled like a memory. I collapsed into my desk chair and buried my face in my hands. Stress, I whispered to myself. Fatigue. Overwork. I told myself the same lies people always tell themselves when the world starts slipping just slightly off its axis. I needed sleep. That was all. But even sleep offered no refuge that night. I dreamt of the judge's portrait, of the empty chair, of rats with human faces climbing upward into the darkness, of eyes in the ceiling, watching me from the bell tower, of the bell tolling from somewhere deep within the house, not with urgency, but with certainty, as if counting down to something. When I awoke, the fire had gone out. The room was cold and damp, and the chair by the fireplace was no longer empty. The storm came without warning. One moment, I was hunched over my desk, pencil scratching out equations in the amber glow of a dying fire. The next, the wind howled through the chimneys like a scream, rattling the windows in their frames. The rain came down in sheets, pelting the roof with a fury that sounded like fists. I welcomed it at first. The thunder was a distraction from the rats, from the shadows, from the suffocating silence that had ruled the house for days. But deep down, I knew better. This storm wasn't just weather. It felt like a signal. The light bulbs flickered once, twice. Then the house plunged into darkness. The sudden absence of light was smothering. I groped for my candle, fumbled with the matchbox, and struck a flame. The brief hiss sounded too loud. I lit a few more candles and arranged them on the desk and mantel, trying to keep the corners of the study at bay, and then I heard it. The rat, the large one. Its claws tapped slowly across the wooden floorboards, louder than any rodent should sound. I turned slowly, candle trembling in my hand. It was there. sitting in the chair again, perfectly still, as if it had never left. Its eyes, those terrible, knowing eyes, locked onto mine with unnatural stillness. And before I could move, before I could even flinch, it rose on its hind legs and scurried toward the fireplace. No, not toward it. Upper. It climbed the bell rope, scaling the length with impossible ease, vanishing into the black hole in the ceiling. And then the room changed. The air grew heavy, thick with heat, despite the cold storm raging outside. My ears popped, as if pressure was building from within the house itself. The candle flames leaned sideways, then upward, pulled toward the ceiling by a draft that didn't exist. I took a step back, my breath catching, and the rope began to lower. Slowly, like a serpent descending from its nest, the thick, coarse rope unraveled downward, its end brushing the floor in front of me. It was tied in a loop now, a perfect noose. And above it, from the hole in the ceiling, something came down with it. It wasn't the rat. It was him, the judge. His form emerged gradually, like smoke taking shape, first a shadow, then flesh. Robes of black and crimson flowed down his gaunt frame. His face was the same as the portrait, pale, cruel, expressionless, but his eyes burned with a light I can only describe as judgment. Not anger, not wrath, but pure, unrelenting sentence. His feet didn't touch the floor. He hovered, inches above the ground, suspended by the very air around him. In his pale hand, he held the end of the rope, and with an almost theatrical precision, he began to swing the noose gently from side to side, as if timing it, as if measuring my neck. My legs refused to move. My voice wouldn't rise. The fire went out with a hiss, leaving only the sickly flicker of candles and the silent, swaying specter before me. He raised one hand, thin, long fingers pointing toward me, not beckoning, accusing. I staggered backward, knocking over my chair, sending books sprawling across the floor. My heart pounded like a drum. I tried to speak, to demand what he wanted, to scream, to plead, but nothing left my throat but a whisper. The judge stepped forward. The candles sputtered. The noose swung wider. I scrambled to the door, yanked the knob. It didn't budge. It felt locked from the outside, though I had never locked it. I pounded my fists against it, shouted for help, even though I knew no one would hear me over the storm. I turned, and the judge was there, inches from me now. I could feel the cold of him, not like a breeze, not natural, like the cold of a tombstone pulled from fresh earth. The bell rope twitched behind him, rising now, tightening. And in that moment, I understood something that shook me to my core. The rats weren't fleeing the house. They were witnesses, and the judge had come to deliver his final sentence. The candles went out, and I was left in perfect, suffocating dark. I remember screaming. It wasn't even words at first, just a raw, instinctual sound, a protest against the impossible thing before me. The judge hovered just beyond the edge of my desk, the noose in his hand swinging like a pendulum between us. The flames had died. The storm outside still raged, but in the study, time had halted. And then the bell rang. A single, deep, jarring toll from above. Not the sound of warning or fire, but of judgment, of finality. I turned and bolted for the door. My hands gripped the knob and twisted, yanked, pounded, but it didn't move. It was sealed shut. I threw my shoulder into it. Nothing. My mind, trained in logic and reason, shattered against the fact that wood and iron could hold fast against my desperation. Behind me, I heard the scrape of wood. I turned. The furniture moved. Bookshelves groaned as they slid across the floor, cutting off the windows. The desk shifted sideways, blocking the fireplace. A chair tipped over and landed in front of the door like a sentry. The house itself had turned against me, walls leaning in, shadows stretching, and the judge came closer. He didn't walk. He glided, his robes untouched by gravity, his eyes locked on mine with a hatred so personal, so ancient. It chilled me to the marrow. I grabbed a candle and hurled it. It passed through him, splattering wax across the floor. The bell rang again, closer this time. Louder. Then came the rats. They erupted from every crevice. Holes in the walls, gaps in the floorboards, even from inside the fireplace. Dozens, maybe hundreds, squealing, snapping, their eyes gleaming in the candlelight like shards of glass. They rushed at me in a tide, crawling over my boots, up my legs, biting through cloth, through skin. I fell backward, screaming, swatting, stomping. But they didn't stop. My trousers darkened with blood. My hands throbbed with pain as I crushed one after another beneath frantic fists. And above it all, the bell rang again. I staggered to my feet and threw the heavy math book from the desk, Calculus of Variations, directly at the judge's head. He didn't flinch. The noose kept swinging. Slower now, as if it were waiting. The rats hissed in chorus. Desperate, I grabbed the fire poker and charged. I swung wildly at the judge's form, but the iron passed through his chest like smoke. He turned his head, just slightly, and looked at me the way a man might glance at a spider crawling across the gallows floor. Then, he raised his hand. The bell rope shot down like a whip and wrapped around my wrist. I screamed as it burned into my skin, tightening with unnatural force. I tried to wrench free, but it yanked me forward, toward him, toward the swinging noose that now dangled mere inches from my face. "No, no, please," I gasped. "This isn't real. I didn't do anything." But the judge said nothing. He only watched, his mouth closed, his silence a sentence. And the bell rang again. The study was spinning, my vision blurring. The rats were swarming again, now on the desk, the chair, the very walls, as if they too were crawling to witness what came next. I tried to back away, dragging my arm, but the rope pulled tighter. The noose was rising now, moving of its own accord toward my neck. I fought. God, I fought. I clawed at the rope, kicked over the lamp, sent flames licking up one side of the drapes. Smoke curled around us, but the judge remained unmoved. The fire licked his robes, passed through them like fog, and still, the noose crept closer. My throat ached with each ragged breath. My knees buckled. I fell against the bookshelf, sending old volumes raining down like dead leaves. I tried to scream again, but my voice cracked, stolen by the bell's next toll, so loud it rattled the very walls, shaking dust from the ceiling beams. Then the rope jerked upward. My feet left the floor, and the world went black. They heard the bell. That was what brought them. The villagers, the grocer, the landlord's son. Just past dawn, after a night of ceaseless thunder and phantom tolls that echoed through the valley like the call of something ancient and final. It had rung 12 times, they said, though no one dared approach the mansion while it was still dark. By morning, the storm had passed. The skies above Benchurch were an eerie, featureless gray. The trees that lined the road to the judge's house swayed gently in the breeze, dripping rainwater like they wept for something they couldn't name. The gates to the mansion creaked open with the first push, rusted hinges screaming in protest. The grass was soaked, overgrown, and strangely quiet. No birds, no insects. Only the crunch of hesitant boots pressing forward. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was damp and thick, heavy with the smell of smoke and old wood. The hallway stretched long and still. The walls bore soot marks, as if a fire had tried and failed to spread. The furniture, once settled in the corners, now stood askew, books strewn, a chair overturned, broken glass glinting softly in the pale morning light. And then they saw the study. The door hung ajar. A few stepped in first, calling my name. They found me there, suspended like a grotesque pendulum from the thick bell rope, my body pale, slack, my feet inches from the floor. The noose was cinched cruelly tight. My eyes were closed. There were no signs of struggle, only a strange peace etched on my face, as if I had seen something in those final moments that left me beyond fear or pain. The bell rope swayed slightly, as if still remembering its last command. Below me, my math book lay open on the rug, pages soaked with ink and ash. The writing had stopped mid-equation. A pencil had snapped in two beside it. On the opposite side of the room, the high-backed chair by the fire rocked ever so gently, as though someone had just stood up. But it was the painting that made them go still. Above the mantel, the once empty portrait now held its subject once more. The judge had returned. He sat with hands folded on his lap, the black cap of death resting across his knee. His eyes were the same cold, dead marbles they had always been. But now, his mouth curved ever so slightly at the corners. A smile. Not broad, not obvious. Just the faintest suggestion of cruel satisfaction. None dared approach the painting. Not even to touch it. The landlord's son, pale as milk, made the sign of the cross and backed out of the room without a word. The grocer muttered something about God's reckoning and left the house quickly, not even bothering to close the front door behind him. No one in Benchurch spoke much of what happened, not publicly. Whispers spread, of course, about the bell tolling, about the rats that vanished overnight, about the judge who had taken another soul. But no one went near the house again. The landlord put it up for sale twice. No one ever inquired. They say if you walk past the old judge's house at night, you can still hear the bell. Sometimes just a single toll, sometimes 12. No one knows what it means. No one dares find out. And the painting? It remains untouched. They say the judge still smiles, wider now.